When my daughter told me to pack my bags and give up my bedroom to a stranger, I felt my world crumble. But the phone call I made 3 days later would change everything and leave my entire family speechless. I'm glad you're here to follow my story. Please comment which country you're watching from so I can see how far my experience has reached. At 70 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of family conflict imaginable. My name is Dorothy Kellerman, and I've lived through more heartbreak than most people could imagine. I raised 3 children as a widow after my husband Bernard passed away from a sudden heart attack when I was just 48 years old. My daughter Lillian was 16 then, my son Clayton was 14, and my youngest son Owen was only 9. For over 2 decades, I worked grueling double shifts as a nursing supervisor at Riverside Medical Center in Fairhaven, Connecticut to give them everything they needed. College educations at good schools, money for their weddings, down payments on their first homes, help with emergencies whenever they called. I sacrificed dating, traveling, hobbies, friendships, everything that could have made my own life richer and fuller. My children were my entire universe, and I poured every ounce of my energy, every dollar I earned, and every bit of my heart into making sure they had better lives than I did. I never remarried, though there were opportunities. Harold from church had asked me to dinner several times. My colleague Dr. Richard Shen had made it clear he was interested. But I always said no. I told myself my children needed me, that dating would be a distraction, that I owed it to Bernard's memory to focus entirely on raising his children properly. Looking back now, I wonder if I was just afraid of being hurt again, afraid of letting someone new into my carefully controlled world. Lillian became a successful real estate agent in nearby Bridgeport. She married a finance manager named Douglas Winters, and they had 2 boys, Ethan, now 16, and Lucas, now 14. Lillian had always been ambitious, even as a child. She was the one who organized her siblings, who made plans and expected everyone to follow them. Sometimes her efficiency crossed into bossiness, but I told myself it was just leadership ability. Clayton opened his own dental practice in New Haven after years of working for other dentists to pay off his student loans. He was the responsible one, methodical and reliable. He called me every Thursday evening like clockwork, asking if I needed anything, if the house was in good repair, if my car was running well. He'd married a teacher named Patricia, and they had a daughter, Sophie, who just turned 7. And then there was Owen. My baby, now 43 years old. Owen had always been the wild card of my 3 children. Charming, spontaneous, always landing on his feet no matter what chaos he created. He'd been married to his wife Stephanie for 12 years. They had no children, which Stephanie had always been quietly devastated about. She'd wanted a family desperately, but Owen kept putting it off, saying they needed to be more financially stable first, that he wasn't ready for that level of responsibility. Owen worked in commercial construction management, making excellent money when projects were steady, but he'd always been irresponsible with finances. He drove expensive cars he couldn't afford, took lavish vacations on credit cards, bought the latest electronics and gadgets. Stephanie had confided in me once, during a Christmas dinner 2 years ago, that they were drowning in debt despite Owen's good salary. I'd lent them $8,000 to catch up on bills, money I'd saved from my pension. Owen had promised to pay me back. He never did. 6 months ago, everything in my life seemed stable enough. I was living in a comfortable 3-bedroom ranch house on Maple Ridge Drive in suburban Willowbrook, about 40 minutes outside Bridgeport. It was the same house where I'd raised my children, the house Bernard and I had bought when Lillian was just 2 years old. It had a big backyard where the kids had played, a kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals, bedrooms that still held echoes of their teenage years. The mortgage was paid off 10 years ago, thanks to a small life insurance policy Bernard had and my years of careful saving. My modest pension from Riverside Medical Center, combined with Social Security, was enough to cover my expenses comfortably. I wasn't wealthy, but I was secure. The house was mine, free and clear. It represented everything I'd worked for, every sacrifice I'd made. Lillian visited every few weeks with Douglas and the boys. We'd have Sunday dinners. I'd make pot roast or lasagna, her favorites from childhood. She'd update me on her real estate deals, show me photos of the expensive houses she was selling, talk about the boys' soccer games and school achievements. Douglas was always polite but distant, checking his phone constantly, clearly preferring to be anywhere else. Clayton called every Thursday evening without fail. Our conversations followed a comfortable pattern. He'd ask about my health, my activities, whether I needed anything. I'd ask about his practice, about Patricia and Sophie, about their lives. It felt solid, dependable, like Clayton himself. Owen was less consistent, but that was just his nature. He'd go weeks without calling, then show up unexpectedly with flowers and charm, making me feel guilty for ever doubting his love. He'd tell me stories about his construction projects, about difficult clients and workplace drama. He never mentioned the money I'd lent him. I never asked. My life had settled into a predictable rhythm that felt safe. I volunteered twice a week at the Willowbrook Community Library. I attended church on Sundays. I had my book club on Tuesday evenings with 4 other women my age. We'd been meeting for 8 years, working our way through contemporary fiction and arguing good-naturedly about plots and characters. I had my garden where I grew tomatoes and herbs. I had my routines, my small pleasures, my independence. Then, on a rainy Tuesday evening in late March, the phone rang. It was Lillian, her voice carrying that brisk, professional tone she used with difficult clients or stubborn contractors. "Mom, we need to have a serious conversation about your living situation," she said without preamble. "Can I come over tonight? It's important, and it can't wait." Something in her voice made my stomach clench with anxiety. "Of course, sweetheart. Is everything all right? We'll discuss it when I get there. I'll be over in about 40 minutes. She hung up before I could ask anything else. I spent those 40 minutes trying to imagine what could possibly be so urgent. Was she sick? Were the boys in trouble? Had something happened to Douglas? My mind spun through increasingly dark possibilities, each one worse than the last. Lillian arrived at exactly 6:30, still wearing her work clothes, an expensive charcoal gray suit with a cream silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Lillian arrived at exactly 6:30, still wearing her work clothes, an expensive charcoal gray suit with a cream silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun that made her look older than her 38 years. She had my eyes, Bernard's stubborn chin, and an expression I couldn't quite read. She didn't accept my offer of tea or coffee. She didn't sit down in her usual spot on the living room sofa where we normally chatted. Instead, she stood near the fireplace, her expensive leather handbag clutched in front of her like a shield, her arms crossed, looking everywhere except directly at me. "Mom, I'm going to be direct because there's no easy way to say this," she began, and I could hear that she'd rehearsed these words, practiced them until they sounded firm and final. "Douglas and I have been having extensive discussions about your future, and we've come to the conclusion that you need to seriously consider alternative living arrangements." I stared at her, genuinely not comprehending. "My future? Alternative living arrangements? Lillian, what are you talking about? This is my home. I'm perfectly fine here." "Mom, you're 70 years old now." She said it like it was a diagnosis, a terminal condition. "And this house is too much for you to maintain properly. The yard alone is nearly an acre. You can barely keep up with the mowing and weeding. The roof needs replacing, you know it does. You've been ignoring that water stain in the hallway ceiling for 6 months. The heating system is ancient and inefficient. The foundation probably needs work. It's not practical or safe for an elderly woman to live alone in a house this size anymore." Each word felt like a small slap. Elderly woman. As if I'd suddenly become decrepit overnight. "I manage just fine, Lillian. Yes, the house needs some repairs, but all houses do. I have a landscaping service that comes twice a month, you know that. The house is in good condition overall. And I'm not alone. I have neighbors, friends from church, my book club, the library volunteers I work with. Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Lillian's voice took on that sharp edge I remembered from her teenage years, when she'd been frustrated with her younger brothers or with plans that weren't going her way. The situation is actually more complicated than just your living arrangements. Owen needs a place to stay. His situation has become complicated, and he needs somewhere stable for a while. Somewhere he can get his life back on track. Owen. My heart sank. What had he done now? What kind of complicated? Is he in trouble? Does he need money? Lillian's jaw tightened, and she looked away, studying the family photos on the mantel instead of meeting my eyes. He's been having serious problems with Stephanie. Their marriage is essentially over. She filed for divorce 3 weeks ago, and Owen needs to move out of their condo by the end of the month. He needs a place to stay while he figures out his next steps, gets back on his feet financially and emotionally. The news hit me like cold water. Owen and Stephanie divorcing? They'd been together since college, married for 12 years. Stephanie was sweet and patient, always trying to smooth over Owen's impulsiveness, always supporting him despite his financial recklessness. What had happened? But underneath my shock was relief. Of course Owen could stay here. He was my son. Well, naturally Owen can stay here, I said immediately, my voice warming with the thought of being able to help him through this difficult time. He can have the guest room for as long as he needs it. I'd love to have him here, to help him through the divorce. Poor Owen, this must be devastating for him. It's not just Owen, Mom. Lillian cut me off, her voice flat and final. He's bringing someone with him. Her name is Angelica Torres. The name hung in the air between us like a neon sign I didn't want to read. Angelica? Who's Angelica? Lillian took a deep breath, and I could see her steeling herself. She's the woman Owen has been involved with. They've been seeing each other for about 8 months now. That's why Stephanie is divorcing him. She found out about the affair. The words didn't make sense at first. My Owen? My charming, impulsive, but fundamentally good boy was having an affair? That's impossible. Owen wouldn't, he's not the type to, Mom, he is the type. He did. Stephanie caught him with hotel receipts and credit card statements. He's been lying to her for months, spending money they didn't have on trips and gifts for his mistress while Stephanie worked extra hours trying to keep them afloat financially. Lillian's voice was matter-of-fact, clinical, as if she were describing a failed real estate transaction rather than the destruction of my son's marriage. I felt physically ill. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Lillian, you can't possibly expect me to welcome Owen and his mistress into my home. What about Stephanie? She's been part of our family for over a decade. She's been nothing but loving and patient with Owen. I can't just, Stephanie is no longer part of our family, Lillian said, her voice hard as granite. She's divorcing Owen, which means she's chosen to remove herself from this family. Owen is your son, your flesh and blood. Family comes first, Mom. You taught us that yourself, remember? Blood is thicker than water. Family stands together no matter what. Not when family is behaving dishonorably. My voice rose despite my effort to stay calm. Owen made vows to Stephanie. He promised to love and cherish her, to be faithful to her. Marriage isn't something you can just throw away because someone younger and more exciting comes along, Mom. I didn't drive all the way over here to debate the ethics of Owen's personal choices. Lillian's patience was clearly wearing thin. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her mouth. The situation is what it is. Owen made his decisions, and now he's dealing with the consequences. He's your son, and he needs help. That's all that matters right now. He needs a place to stay, and you have a 3-bedroom house with plenty of space. It's the perfect solution. Fine, I said, trying to maintain some control over the situation. My hands were shaking, so I clasped them together in my lap. Owen can stay in the guest room. I'll help him however I can. But this Angelica woman will have to find her own accommodation. I won't enable an affair under my roof. I won't be part of destroying Stephanie's life any more than Owen already has. Lillian's expression turned cold in a way I'd never seen before. Her eyes went flat, emotionless, like she was looking at a problem rather than her mother. "That's not going to work, Mom. Angelica is coming with Owen. They're a couple now, whether you approve of it or not. Whether any of us approve doesn't matter. It's done. And there's something else you need to know." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. What else could there possibly be? Angelica's mother, Vivian Torres, is also coming to stay. She's 68 years old, recently widowed. Her husband died of COVID about 9 months ago. Angelica doesn't want to leave her alone in San Diego while she relocates here to Connecticut to be with Owen. Vivian is struggling with her grief, having difficulty managing on her own, and Angelica wants to be able to take care of her mother during this transition period. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The words didn't seem real. "You want me to house not just your brother and his mistress, but also the mistress's mother? Lillian, have you completely lost your mind? This is insane." "I want you to help your family," Lillian said, her voice rising to match mine. "Owen is going through an incredibly difficult time. His marriage is ending, he's about to lose his home, he's emotionally devastated. He needs our support, not our judgment and condemnation. And yes, that means accepting Angelica into the family and being welcoming to Vivian. It means being a bigger person and putting your son's needs ahead of your own outdated moral judgments. Where exactly do you expect all these people to stay?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "I have 3 bedrooms. My room, the guest room, and the small room I use for sewing and my craft projects." Lillian took a deep breath, and I could see her preparing for the final blow. "Owen and Angelica will take the master bedroom, your room. It's the largest bedroom and has the ensuite bathroom with the shower. They'll need the space and privacy. Vivian will take the guest room since she's older and will need the comfort of a proper bedroom with adequate closet space. And you'll move into the small room at the end of the hall." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Everything became surreal, dreamlike, as if I were watching this conversation happen to someone else. "You want me to give up my bedroom? The room I've slept in for 30 years? The room I shared with your father? Move into a room that's barely bigger than a closet, that barely fits a twin bed? It's temporary, Mom. Just until Owen and Angelica can find a place of their own. A few months, maybe 6 at the absolute most. Owen needs time to recover financially from the divorce, to save up for a security deposit and first month's rent. Angelica needs to find a job here in Connecticut. They just need a little time to get established. Surely you can make this small sacrifice for your son." "Small sacrifice?" I could barely speak. "You're asking me to give up my home to strangers. They're not strangers, they're family. Or they will be. Owen and Angelica are serious about their relationship. This isn't just some fling, Mom. He loves her. Really loves her in a way he never loved Stephanie, if we're being honest. He's finally found someone who makes him truly happy. And what if I refuse?" The question came out barely above a whisper. Lillian's eyes went cold, calculating. "Then Owen will have nowhere to go. He'll end up in some depressing extended stay motel, barely scraping by, probably spiraling into depression. Angelica will probably leave him because what woman wants to be with a man who's homeless and desperate? His life will fall apart completely, and it will be your fault. Is that what you want? To abandon your son when he needs you most? To let your pride and your judgmental attitude destroy your own child's chance at happiness?" The manipulation was so blatant, so obvious, and yet it still worked. Because underneath the anger, I felt it, that familiar crushing guilt, that terrible fear of being a bad mother, of failing my children, of being the kind of person who values things over people. "I need time to think about this," I said weakly, hating how small my voice sounded. "They're arriving this Friday," Lillian said, checking her expensive watch with barely concealed impatience. "That gives you 3 days to prepare the rooms and get used to the idea. Clayton and I will both help you move your things into the small bedroom this weekend. We'll make it comfortable for you, don't worry. We'll get you a nice new mattress, some fresh paint on the walls. It'll be cozy." "This Friday?" Lillian, that's only 3 days away. That's impossible, it's already decided, Mom. Clayton agrees with me completely. We both think this is the best solution for everyone involved. Owen needs stability, and you need purpose. Having people in the house will be good for you. You've been alone too long, getting set in your ways, becoming isolated. This will bring new life into the house, new energy. My mind was reeling. Clayton knows about this? You discussed this with him before talking to me? Of course I did. We're both adults with families of our own. We needed to make sure we were on the same page about how to handle Owen's situation and your living arrangements. It's called being responsible, Mom. She walked toward the door, signaling that the conversation was over, that my input was no longer required or even welcome. Then she paused with her hand on the doorknob and turned back to face me. Her expression softened slightly, but it felt manufactured, rehearsed. Oh, and Mom? When Owen and Angelica arrive on Friday, please be welcoming. No judgment, no comments about the situation with Stephanie, no passive-aggressive remarks or pointed silences. Angelica is nervous about meeting you. She knows you were close to Stephanie, and she's worried you'll resent her. Don't prove her right. And Vivian is going through a very difficult time after losing her husband. She's fragile right now, grieving. Please make her feel at home, make her feel welcome and comfortable. This is important to all of us. Don't make it harder than it has to be. She left before I could respond, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded final, like the closing of a chapter one hadn't finished reading. I sat alone in my living room as the evening shadows grew longer, the March rain pattering against the windows, trying to understand how my entire life had just been rearranged without my consent, without my input mattering at all. I felt like a tenant being evicted from my own existence. That night, I barely slept. I lay in my bed, in my room, for potentially the last time, and stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything. This room held so many memories. Bernard and I had painted it together when we first moved in, arguing playfully about whether to go with sage green or light blue. We'd made love in this bed, whispered our dreams and fears to each other in the dark. I'd rocked my babies here when they were sick or scared. I'd cried here after Bernard died, burying my face in his pillow, breathing in the last traces of his cologne. And now I was being asked to give it up to my son and his mistress. Around 11 p.m., I decided to call Clayton, hoping desperately that he'd be the voice of reason, that Lillian had misrepresented his position, that surely my responsible, logical son would see how wrong this was. He answered on the third ring, his voice slightly irritated at being called so late. Mom? Is everything okay? It's almost 11. Clayton, I'm sorry to call so late, but I need to talk to you about what Lillian told me tonight. About Owen moving in, and this woman Angelica, and her mother. Clayton, please tell me you didn't actually agree to all of this. There was a pause, and I could hear Patricia in the background asking who was calling. Then Clayton's voice, firmer now, taking on that professional tone he used with patients who questioned his treatment plans. Mom, I know it's a lot to adjust to, and I know this isn't an ideal situation. But Lillian's right. Owen needs us right now. He's made some mistakes, yes, but he's still our brother, still your son. Family helps family, no questions asked. That's what you always taught us, right? That's what you did for us our whole lives, you sacrificed everything to help us. Now it's Owen's turn to need that help. But Clayton, they're asking me to give up my bedroom. To move into a room that's barely big enough for, Mom, he interrupted, his voice gentle but firm, I know it's your house. But honestly, maybe having people around would be good for you. You've been alone for over 20 years now. You've been alone too long, getting set in your routines, limiting your life. Dad's been gone for 22 years. You never dated, never tried to build a new life. You just worked and took care of us, and now we're all grown with our own families. Maybe this is actually an opportunity for you to be part of a family dynamic again instead of rattling around in that big house all by yourself. The words stung worse than anything Lillian had said. Clayton, I'm not alone by choice. I'm alone because your father died and I spent the next 22 years raising you three instead of building a new life for myself. I sacrificed dating, traveling, having any personal life at all because you children needed me. That was your choice, Mom," Clayton interrupted again, his tone taking on a slight edge. "No one forced you to do that. No one asked you to sacrifice everything. You made those choices, and you can't hold them over our heads now. We're grateful for everything you did, of course we are. But now we're asking you to help Owen, and frankly, you're making this all about yourself instead of thinking about what he needs." I felt like I'd been physically slapped. I'm making it about myself? Clayton, they want me to give up my bedroom to a woman who destroyed Owen's marriage. They want me to welcome this woman's mother into my home like she's some kind of honored guest. How is that, Mom? Jennifer and Owen had problems long before Angelica came along. You just didn't see them because you always want to believe everyone's perfect and happy, that everyone's marriage is like yours and Dad's was. The reality is that Owen and Stephanie were wrong for each other from the start. They never should have gotten married in the first place. Owen has finally found someone who makes him feel alive again, someone who really gets him and appreciates him. The least you can do is support him instead of judging him. What about Stephanie? She's been nothing but kind and patient with Owen. Stephanie will be fine. She's young, she has a good job, she'll move on. But Owen needs us now. He needs his family to stand by him. If you can't do that, if you're going to choose your pride and your judgmental attitude over your own son, then maybe it would be better if you considered other living arrangements. Maybe one of those nice senior communities where you'd have people your own age around, activities, meals provided. You want to put me in a nursing home? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm not saying a nursing home, Mom. I'm saying there are options if living with Owen and his new family doesn't work for you. But I really hope you'll give this a chance. For Owen's sake, if not for your own. When I hung up, I felt more alone than I had since the night Bernard died. My own children, the people I'd sacrificed everything for, saw me as an obstacle to be managed rather than a person whose feelings mattered. The next 3 days passed in a fog of mechanical activity and mounting dread. I spent Wednesday packing up my bedroom, moving through the space like a ghost, wrapping my life in newspaper and packing tape. I took down the photos from the walls, my wedding photo, pictures of the children at various ages, the family portrait we'd had taken the year before Bernard died. I packed away the books from my nightstand, the small jewelry box that had been my mother's, the framed pressed flowers from my wedding bouquet. I stripped the bed of the quilt my mother had made for my wedding, the one I'd slept under for over 40 years. I folded it carefully and put it in a box, knowing there would be no room for it in my new space. On Thursday, Clayton came over with his truck to help move the furniture. He was kind but distant, treating me like one of his patients, polite, professional, but emotionally removed. We moved my heavy oak dresser into the small room, where it took up nearly half the available space. The bed, the twin bed that had been Owen's when he was 9 years old, barely fit along the opposite wall. There was no room for my nightstand, no room for the comfortable reading chair I'd had by the window. The single window in the room looked out at the neighbor's tall wooden fence, blocking any real view. No morning sun, no evening light. Just a narrow rectangle of gray sky. "It's cozy," Clayton said, trying for optimism. "Very efficient. You won't have to walk far to get anywhere." I didn't respond. What could I say? By Friday morning, my house had been completely transformed. The master bedroom, my bedroom, was ready for strangers. Lillian had come by with fresh sheets, new towels, even some decorative pillows she thought Angelica might like. She'd removed most of my personal touches, boxing them up and storing them in the garage. "You don't want them to feel like they're intruding on your space," she'd explained. As if they weren't intruding on my entire life. The guest room had been prepared for Vivian with equal care. Lillian had bought a new comforter set in soft blues and grays, put fresh flowers on the dresser, arranged everything to look welcoming and comfortable. My new room, by contrast, was stark and depressing. The twin bed with its thin mattress, the oversized dresser that dominated the space, a metal clothing rack shoved in one corner because there was no closet, just a narrow built-in shelf that held perhaps a tenth of my clothes. The overhead light was harsh and fluorescent. The walls were bare. At 3 p.m., Owen's truck pulled into my driveway, and I felt my heart start to race with anxiety and dread. Lillian was right behind him in her SUV, ready to help with the move-in, to facilitate this invasion she'd orchestrated. I stood on my front porch, on my house, that I had paid for with decades of hard work and sacrifice, and watched as the people who would be taking over my life climbed out of their vehicles. Owen looked guilty when he saw me, his eyes not quite meeting mine as he walked up the path. He hugged me, but it was perfunctory, brief, like checking something off a list. "Thanks for doing this, Mom. You're a real lifesaver. I promise it won't be for long. Just until we get back on our feet, you know. Save up some money, find our own place." His words sounded rehearsed, insincere. Or maybe I was just hearing them through the filter of my hurt and anger. Angelica emerged from the passenger side of the truck, and I got my first good look at the woman who had destroyed my son's marriage. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35 at most, with long, glossy dark hair that fell in perfect waves past her shoulders. She was wearing expensive-looking activewear, tight black leggings and a designer sports jacket that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her figure was perfect, the kind that came from hours at expensive gyms with personal trainers. She had the casual confidence of someone who'd always been beautiful, who'd always had doors open for her, who'd always gotten what she wanted. She walked up to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a performance of warmth and gratitude that was so clearly false it almost made me laugh. "Mrs. Kellerman, it's so wonderful to finally meet you. Owen has told me so many amazing things about you. Your home is absolutely lovely. Thank you so much for opening it to us during this transition. It means the world to both of us." Her voice was honeyed, practiced, the kind of voice people use when they're trying to sell you something you don't want to buy. But it was Vivian Torres who made my blood run cold. She emerged from the back seat of Owen's truck like a queen surveying a disappointing kingdom. She was my age, perhaps a year or two younger, but she'd clearly spent a fortune fighting it. Her face had that too smooth, too tight look of multiple cosmetic procedures. Her hair was platinum blonde, expensively colored and styled. She wore designer clothes. I recognized the logo on her handbag because Lillian had one similar. Diamond studs glinted in her ears, real ones, substantial enough to cost more than my car. Everything about her screamed money and status and the expectation that the world would bend itself to accommodate her preferences. She looked at my house with barely concealed disdain, her carefully shaped eyebrows rising slightly as she took in the modest ranch-style home with its simple landscaping and dated exterior. "So this is the place," she said to Angelica, her voice carrying clear disappointment despite her attempt to sound neutral. "Well, I suppose it will do for now." Though I was picturing something a bit more spacious. Lillian, appeared at my elbow immediately, her hand on my arm in what was probably meant to be a supportive gesture but felt more like a warning. "Mom, why don't you help me bring in Vivian's things? She has quite a lot of luggage. Owen and Angelica can start moving their belongings into the master bedroom." Into my bedroom, she meant. Into the room where I'd slept for 30 years, where Bernard and I had built our life together. For the next 2 hours, I watched my home be invaded and transformed. Owen and Angelica took over my bedroom without ceremony or apparent second thoughts, laughing together as they unpacked their things, arranging their belongings in the space I'd just vacated. I could hear Angelica exclaiming over the size of the closet, "So much room. This is perfect." As if she were moving into a luxury apartment rather than displacing an elderly woman from her own bedroom. Vivian claimed the guest room and immediately began rearranging the furniture to suit her preferences, moving the dresser from one wall to another, adjusting the angle of the bed, pulling down the curtains Lillian had just hung because they were too dark and depressing. She spoke to me only once, to ask where she should put her beauty products and whether the bathroom would be just for her use or if she'd have to share. "You'll have the bathroom to yourself," I told her, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I'll be using the small bathroom down the hall." She nodded as if this arrangement were only to be expected, her due as a guest in this house. Lillian directed everything like she was staging a house for sale, moving through the rooms with her phone in hand, taking notes, making suggestions, completely ignoring my presence unless she needed me to fetch something or move something or make room for something. She never asked how I was feeling, never acknowledged that this might be difficult for me. I was just another piece of furniture to be rearranged for optimal effect. By dinner time, I was physically and emotionally exhausted. The house buzzed with the energy of new occupation, Owen and Angelica's laughter from my former bedroom, Vivian's voice calling out questions and demands, Lillian's brisk footsteps as she orchestrated the whole production. I retreated to my tiny new room and closed the door, needing just a moment of privacy, a moment to breathe. The room felt like a cell. The twin bed was too small, the mattress thin and uncomfortable. The dresser loomed large, leaving barely enough space to walk. My clothes hung on the metal rack in the corner, looking sad and displaced. The single window showed me only the neighbor's fence and a narrow strip of gray sky. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried not to cry. From somewhere in the house, I heard Lillian calling out, "Mom, can you come help with dinner? We need to figure out the kitchen arrangements." Kitchen arrangements. As if the kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals for my family now required new systems and procedures to accommodate its new residents. I took a deep breath, wiped my eyes, and opened the door. That evening, we all sat down to dinner together, a meal I'd prepared from food I'd bought with my pension money, served in my dining room at my table. Owen and Angelica sat close together, his arm draped casually over her shoulders, acting like newlyweds on their honeymoon. Vivian picked at her food and made small criticisms. The chicken was a bit dry, the vegetables were overcooked. Did I have any idea how much sodium was in this meal? Lillian kept up a stream of cheerful conversation, asking Angelica about her plans for finding work in Connecticut, complimenting Vivian on her jewelry, steering the conversation away from anything that might cause discomfort or tension. No one asked me anything. No one seemed to notice that I was barely eating, that I was sitting in my own dining room feeling like an unwelcome guest at someone else's party. After dinner, I started clearing the table out of habit, but Angelica stopped me with a bright smile. "Oh, Mrs. Kellerman, you don't need to worry about cleanup. I'll take care of everything. You just relax. You must be exhausted from all the preparations today." It sounded generous, considerate even. But what I heard was, "You're old and tired. Go to your little room and let the young, capable people handle things from here." I went. I retreated to my cell-like bedroom and closed the door, listening to the sounds of laughter and conversation drifting through the house. My house. Except it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like I was the guest, the temporary resident, the person who could be dismissed and displaced at will. Around 10 p.m., the house finally grew quiet. I lay in the uncomfortable twin bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of other people living in my space. The old house creaked and settled in ways that suddenly seemed ominous. I could hear the faint murmur of Owen and Angelica's voices from my former bedroom, followed by their laughter. Then, just as I was starting to drift into an uneasy sleep, I heard Vivian's voice carrying clearly through the thin walls. She was talking on her phone, her voice sharp and irritated, not bothering to keep her volume down. "I can't believe we're stuck in this cramped little house with that bitter old woman," Vivian said, her words cutting through the quiet like a knife. "The neighborhood is so dated, and the house itself is practically falling apart. No central air conditioning, can you believe it? And the kitchen is from the 1980s. The whole place smells like old person and mothballs." I lay frozen in my bed, barely breathing, my heart pounding. "The sooner Owen finds us a proper place to live, the better," Vivian continued. "Angelica says it'll be a few months, but I told her I'm not staying here past summer. I'd rather go back to San Diego and deal with my grief alone than spend another 6 months in this depressing little house with that judgy old bat giving us dirty looks." Then I heard Angelica's laugh, bright, careless, floating down the hallway from my former bedroom. "Just be patient, Mom. She'll adjust. They always do. Old people are so desperate for family contact that they'll accept anything eventually. Owen says she never sees anyone, barely has any friends. We're probably the most excitement she's had in years. She should be grateful we're here." The cruelty of it, the casual dismissiveness, hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't a person to them. I wasn't Dorothy Kellerman, who had worked herself to exhaustion to raise 3 children alone, who had sacrificed every personal dream and desire to give them good lives. I wasn't a woman with feelings and dignity and rights to her own home. I was just that bitter old woman, the judgy old bat, someone to be tolerated until they could find better accommodations. Someone so pathetic and desperate that I'd accept any treatment just to have people around me. I lay in that narrow, uncomfortable bed in that cramped, depressing room, and something inside me shifted. Something that had been bending under the weight of guilt and family obligation and fear of being alone suddenly snapped. I wasn't going to adjust. I wasn't going to be grateful for scraps of attention from people who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience with a free place to stay. I wasn't going to let these people steal my home, my dignity, and my self-respect without consequences. But I couldn't just rage at them or throw them out. I'd already seen how that would go. Lillian and Clayton would paint me as the unreasonable old woman, the selfish mother who refused to help her son in his time of need. I'd be cut off, isolated, proven right in Angelica's assessment that I had no one and nothing. No, if I was going to fight back, I needed to be smart about it. Strategic. I needed to think this through carefully, gather information, understand exactly what I was dealing with. I needed to know who these people really were, Angelica Torres and her mother Vivian. Where they'd come from, what their lives had been like before they invaded mine, whether they had a history of taking advantage of people. And most importantly, I needed to understand Owen's finances. How had he gotten into a position where he had nowhere to go except his elderly mother's home? Where was all his money going? If he was working steadily in construction management, making good money as Lillian claimed, why couldn't he afford even a modest apartment? Something didn't add up. Tomorrow, I decided, would start asking questions. Making phone calls. Doing research. If there was something wrong here, something beyond just my son making bad choices with women, I was going to find it. I thought about Stephanie, Owen's soon-to-be ex-wife. We'd never been particularly close. She was quiet and reserved, and I'd always been so busy that I hadn't made the effort I should have. But she'd been kind to me, always including me in their holiday celebrations, calling to check on me occasionally. Maybe Stephanie would talk to me. Maybe she knew things about Owen's situation, about Angelica, that my other children weren't telling me. The thought of reaching out to her made me nervous. Lillian had made it clear that Stephanie was no longer family, that I was supposed to cast her aside along with Owen's marriage vows. But Lillian wasn't here right now. Lillian didn't control who I talked to or what questions I asked. I was still Dorothy Kellerman. This was still my house, no matter who was sleeping in my bedroom. And I was done being passive, being accommodating, being the useful old woman who absorbed whatever treatment her family decided to dish out. The next morning, I would start fighting back. But I'd be smart about it. Careful. Strategic. Because something told me that when I started pulling on the threads of this situation, the whole thing was going to unravel in ways none of them expected. And for the first time since Lillian had walked through my door 3 days ago with her pronouncements and ultimatums, I felt something other than grief and defeat. I felt determined. I woke at 5:30 a.m., my usual time, to the unfamiliar feeling of my shoulder pressed against a wall that shouldn't have been there. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't remember where I was. The room was too small, too dark, the ceiling too close. Then reality crashed back in, and with it came the crushing weight of yesterday's displacement. This was my new reality. The cramped room, the twin bed, the single window looking out at nothing. The sound of strangers sleeping in my bedroom, occupying my space, taking over my life. I lay there for a few minutes, listening to the house. It was quiet except for the familiar creaks and groans of the old heating system kicking on. No voices yet. Everyone else was still asleep, probably exhausted from their big moving day. Good. That gave me time. I got up carefully. The room was so small that I had to navigate carefully to avoid bumping into the oversized dresser, and pulled on my robe. My old terrycloth robe that had seen better days but was comfortable and familiar. I opened my door as quietly as possible and padded down the hallway to the small bathroom that was now mine to use. The bathroom was tiny, barely room for the toilet, sink, and narrow shower stall. Nothing like the spacious master bathroom with its large vanity and soaking tub that Angelica and Owen were now enjoying. I washed my face and stared at myself in the small mirror above the sink. I looked old. Really old. The harsh fluorescent light showed every line, every age spot, every sag. My gray hair stuck up at odd angles from sleep. My eyes were puffy from the tears I'd finally allowed myself to shed after the lights went out. I looked like exactly what Vivian had called me, a bitter old woman. But as I stared at my reflection, I reminded myself that I was more than what these people saw. I was Dorothy Kellerman, who had survived widowhood at 48 and raised 3 children alone. Who had worked double shifts for 20 years without complaint. Who had put 3 kids through college and helped them all buy their first homes. Who had built a life from nothing after Bernard died and never once asked for help or pity. I wasn't going to let these people reduce me to their convenient caricature of a pathetic old woman. I made coffee in the kitchen, moving quietly through the familiar motions. The coffee maker was old, 15 years at least, but it still worked perfectly. As the coffee brewed, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out my old address book, the one with actual phone numbers written in pen and pencil, crossed out and updated over the years. First call, Stephanie. I found her number and stared at it for a long moment. It was barely 6 a.m., too early to call. But I made a note to try her later this morning. I needed to understand what had really happened in Owen's marriage, what kind of man my son had become when I wasn't looking. Second, I needed to understand Angelica Torres and her mother Vivian. Where they'd come from, what their history was. Lillian had mentioned they were from San Diego. That was a start. Third, Owen's finances. If he was making good money in construction management, why couldn't he afford even a modest apartment? Where was his money going? I was making notes when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, male footsteps. Owen. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair messy from sleep, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. He looked surprised to see me up so early, then guilty again when our eyes met. Mom. Morning. I didn't think anyone else would be up yet. I've always been an early riser, I said quietly. Coffee's ready if you want some. Thanks. He poured himself a cup and stood awkwardly by the counter, not quite meeting my eyes. The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we weren't saying. Finally, he spoke. Mom, about all this. I know it's not ideal. I know you probably think I'm a terrible person for what happened with Stephanie. Do you want to know what I think, Owen? I interrupted, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. I think you made vows to a woman who loved you. I think you broke those vows and broke her heart. I think you're bringing your mistress and her mother into my home and expecting me to pretend that's perfectly acceptable. Owen's face flushed. Mom, you don't understand. Stephanie and I were wrong for each other from the beginning. We stayed together out of habit, not love. I never felt with her what I feel with Angelica. Angela makes me feel alive, like I can be myself without judgment, so you couldn't have figured that out before getting married? Before spending 12 years with someone? I kept my voice low, conscious that we might be overheard. Owen, you're 43 years old. You're not a confused teenager. You're a grown man who made choices, and those choices hurt people. I know that. His voice rose slightly, then dropped again. I know I hurt Stephanie. I feel terrible about it. But I can't stay in a dead marriage just because leaving would be uncomfortable. I deserve to be happy too, Mom. And what about what Stephanie deserves? What about what I deserve? The words came out more forcefully than I'd intended. Do I deserve to be kicked out of my own bedroom? To be treated like a burden in my own home? Owen looked genuinely confused. Kicked out? Mom, no one kicked you out. You're still here. We just needed the space, and your room was the biggest. I heard her, Owen. I cut him off. I heard Vivian on the phone last night. Calling me a bitter old woman. Complaining about how cramped my house is, how dated everything is. I heard Angelica laughing about how old people are so desperate for family that they'll accept any treatment. Owen's face went pale. Mom, I'm sure you misunderstood. Vivian's just stressed from the move, from losing her husband. She doesn't mean anything. I know exactly what I heard. And what I heard was two women mocking me in my own home, treating me like I should be grateful they're willing to live here temporarily until they find something better. Mom, tell me something, Owen. Where is all your money going? The question seemed to come out of nowhere, but I'd been thinking about it all night. You make good money in construction management. Lillian said so. So why can't you afford even a basic apartment? Why do you need to move in here with your mother? Owen's jaw tightened. My finances are complicated right now. The divorce, the legal fees, having to split assets with Stephanie, it's expensive. I just need time to recover. How much money did you spend on Angelica while you were still married to Stephanie? The question hung in the air. Owen's face went from pale to red. That's none of your business. It is my business when you're living in my house rent-free. My voice was steel now. How much, Owen? I don't know. I didn't keep track. Look, Mom, I don't need this right now. I came down here for coffee, not an interrogation. He grabbed his mug and headed toward the stairs. Angelica was right. You are judgy. He was gone before I could respond. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands shaking around my own coffee mug. That's what they'd reduced me to, the judgy old mother who asked uncomfortable questions and made people feel bad about their choices. 20 minutes later, I heard more footsteps. Lighter, more deliberate. Angelica appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing expensive silk pajamas and a matching robe. Her hair was still perfect despite just waking up. She smiled at me, that same false warmth from yesterday. Good morning, Mrs. Kellerman. You're up early. I hope Owen didn't wake you when he came down for coffee. I've always been an early riser, I repeated. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm such a night owl myself. I could sleep until noon if I didn't have things to do. She poured herself coffee and added an excessive amount of cream and sugar. I wanted to thank you again for opening your home to us. I know this situation is probably unusual for you. Unusual. What an interesting word choice. It's certainly not what I expected for this stage of my life, I said carefully. Angelica settled into the chair across from me, wrapping her hands around her mug. I can imagine. And I want you to know that Owen and I are really serious about making this work. We're not just some fling. We're building a future together. A future that started while he was still married to someone else. The words were out before I could stop them. Angelica's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I understand you were close to Stephanie. That must make this harder for you. But sometimes people grow apart. Sometimes the person you marry isn't the person you're meant to be with forever. She took a sip of her coffee. Owen and I have a real connection. A deep, soul-level connection that he never had with Stephanie. Surely you want your son to be truly happy. I want my son to be honorable. To keep his promises. To not hurt people who loved him. Angelica's expression cooled. With all due respect, Mrs. Kellerman, you don't know what Owen's marriage was really like. You only saw the surface. Stephanie was controlling and cold. She made Owen feel trapped, inadequate. He was dying inside that marriage. I thought about the quiet, kind woman I'd known for 12 years. The woman who always asked about my health, who sent me birthday cards, who included me in their celebrations even when Owen clearly wanted to keep things separate. That woman had been controlling and cold? That's not the Stephanie I knew, I said quietly. That's because she put on a show for you. For everyone. But Owen knows the truth. And I helped him see that he deserved better. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. This woman had deliberately pursued a married man, destroyed his marriage, and now sat in my kitchen acting like she'd done him a favor. Before I could respond, Vivian swept into the kitchen. She was already dressed in expensive loungewear, designer leggings and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my grocery budget for a month. Her makeup was perfect, her hair styled. She looked like she was about to have brunch at a country club, not staying in a modest ranch house in suburban Connecticut. Oh good, coffee. She didn't greet me, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. She just poured herself a cup and examined the contents of my refrigerator with a critical eye. Angelica, darling, we're going to need to go shopping. There's nothing suitable here for breakfast. Does this town have a Whole Foods? There's a grocery store about 2 miles away, I said. The Shop and Save on Cedar Street. I do my shopping there every week. Vivian turned to look at me as if she'd just noticed I was in the room. A regular grocery store? She said it the way someone might say, a gas station bathroom. I suppose that will have to do until we figure out where the decent shopping is around here. I felt my temper rising but kept my voice level. That grocery store has served me just fine for 30 years. I'm sure it has, Vivian said with a patronizing smile. Everyone has different standards. Angelica shot her mother a warning look. Mom, let's not, I'm just saying that we're used to a certain quality of food. Organic, fresh, properly sourced. It's important for health, especially at our age. She directed this last part at me with a pointed look, as if I were somehow failing at basic self-care by shopping at a regular grocery store. I stood up, taking my coffee mug to the sink. Feel free to shop wherever you like. Though I should mention that if you're planning to use my kitchen for cooking, I'd appreciate it if you'd clean up after yourselves and replace anything you use. Vivian's eyebrows rose. Replace things? You mean like, pay for groceries? Yes. If you're going to be eating here, contributing to the food costs would be appropriate. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Angelica looked uncomfortable. Vivian looked offended. I assumed that since Owen is family, and we're staying here temporarily at your invitation, I didn't invite anyone, I interrupted quietly. My daughter informed me you were coming and told me to prepare rooms. There's a difference. Vivian's expression turned cold. I see. Well, Angelica, I think we should have a conversation with Owen about the arrangements here. I'm not comfortable in a situation where we're being nickel-and-dimed for groceries. We're not being nickel-and-dimed, Mom, Angelica said quickly, her voice strained. Mrs. Kellerman is just being practical. Of course we'll contribute to household expenses. That's only fair. But Vivian had already left the kitchen, her expensive slippers making soft sounds on the hardwood floor as she headed upstairs. Angelica stayed behind, her smile completely gone now. Mrs. Kellerman, I'm sorry about my mother. She's still grieving, still adjusting. She doesn't always think before she speaks. She seems to think very clearly. She thinks my house is cramped and dated. She thinks I'm a bitter old woman. She said so on the phone last night, loud enough for me to hear through the walls. Angelica's face flushed. You heard that. Look, she was just venting. She didn't mean, she meant every word. And so did you when you laughed and said old people are so desperate for family they'll accept any treatment. Angelica stood up, her hands gripping her coffee mug tightly. I think there's been a misunderstanding. If you heard something that upset you, there's no misunderstanding. I heard exactly what you both think of me. I turned to face her fully. Let me be very clear, Angelica. This is my house. I worked for decades to pay for it. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every improvement, I paid for it with my own money, my own labor. You and your mother are guests here, and not particularly welcome ones. The only reason you're here at all is because Owen is my son and my daughter pressured me into allowing this. Angelica's expression hardened. Owen said you'd be like this. He warned me that you were bitter about your life, that you resented anyone who had more than you do. Is that what he said? The betrayal of it hurt more than I wanted to admit. He said you sacrificed everything for your kids and now you hold it over their heads. That you never moved on after your husband died, never built a new life, and now you're resentful that they've moved forward while you stayed stuck in the past. Each word was a small knife. This was how my son talked about me? To his mistress? Get out of my kitchen, I said quietly. Excuse me? Get out. Now. Angelica stared at me for a moment, then set down her mug with more force than necessary. Fine. But Owen's right about you. You are bitter. She left, and I stood alone in my kitchen, shaking with anger and hurt. This was my life now. Living in a cramped room in my own house, being insulted by strangers, having my own son describe me as bitter and resentful to the woman who destroyed his marriage. I looked at the clock. 7:45 a.m. Still too early to call Stephanie, but maybe not too early to start doing some research. I went to my tiny room and retrieved my laptop, an old model that Clayton had given me 3 years ago when he upgraded his own. I settled back at the kitchen table and opened a browser. Angelica Torres, San Diego. The first few results were social media profiles. I clicked through them, studying the photos and posts. Angelica's Instagram was full of carefully curated images, expensive restaurants, luxury vacations, designer clothes. Her bio said she was a lifestyle consultant and wellness coach, which sounded impressive but vague. I scrolled back through the timeline. 6 months ago, there were photos of her at what looked like expensive hotels. Captions about self-care and treating yourself and living your best life. Then, about 8 months ago, there was a shift. The captions started including things like new beginnings and unexpected love and following your heart. 8 months ago. Right when Owen said they'd started seeing each other. I found Vivian's social media next. Her Facebook profile was more open, less carefully curated. Photos of her late husband, Richard Torres, who had apparently died 10 months ago, not 9 as Lillian had said. Photos of their home in San Diego, a large, beautiful house with an ocean view. Photos of Vivian at charity events, wearing expensive jewelry, smiling with other wealthy-looking women. Then I found something interesting. A post from 7 months ago, after Richard's death. Vivian had written, learning to adjust to new financial realities. Richard, you always handled everything. I wish you taught me more about the money. New financial realities. That was an interesting phrase. I kept digging, moving to public records databases that I'd learned to use during my years helping patients at the hospital navigate insurance and financial aid. Within an hour, I'd found several concerning pieces of information. Richard Torres had died without a will. His estate was still in probate. The house in San Diego was facing foreclosure. There was a notice filed just 3 months ago. So Vivian wasn't the wealthy widow she appeared to be. She was broke, or close to it. That explained a lot. My phone rang, startling me. Lillian's name appeared on the screen. Mom? How's everything going with Owen and Angelica? Her voice was bright, cheerful, completely oblivious to the reality of the situation she'd created. It's been less than 24 hours, Lillian. I know, but I wanted to check in. Make sure everyone's settling in okay, that there haven't been any issues. Issues. What a nice, sanitized word for what was actually happening. Vivian thinks my house is cramped and dated. She complained about my grocery store not being good enough. Angelica told me that Owen says I'm bitter and resentful. And I've been kicked out of my own kitchen by people who think I should be grateful they're willing to live here temporarily. There was a pause. Mom, I'm sure you're exaggerating. Everyone's just adjusting. I heard them last night, Lillian. Through the walls. Calling me a bitter old woman. Laughing about how desperate old people are for family contact. Another pause, longer this time. I'm sure they didn't mean it the way it sounded. Stop. My voice was sharp. Stop making excuses for them. Stop telling me I'm misunderstanding or overreacting. I know what I heard. I know how they're treating me. And I know that you and Clayton pressured me into this situation without caring about how it would affect me. Mom, that's not fair. We were trying to help Owen. No, you were trying to solve Owen's problem in the easiest way possible. And the easiest way was to dump him and his mistress and her mother into my house and tell me to deal with it. You didn't think about what it would cost me. You didn't care. That's not true. Of course we care about you. We just thought, you thought I was lonely and desperate enough to accept any treatment just to have people around. Just like Angelica said. Lillian's voice turned defensive. I never said that. Look, if there are some adjustment issues, that's normal. Give it time. Everyone will settle into a routine. I want them out, Lillian. Silence. I want them out of my house. All three of them. Owen can stay with you or with Clayton. I'm done. Mom, you can't be serious. Where would they go? That's not my problem. Owen is your brother. You want to help him so badly? You take him in. You give up your bedroom for his mistress. You let Vivian complain about your grocery choices and call you bitter behind your back. Mom, I have a family. Douglas and the boys need their space. Our guest room is already being used as Douglas's home office, and I don't have a family. I don't need space. I'm just the convenient old woman with the paid-off house who can be pushed around and dismissed. You're being unreasonable. Lillian's voice had gone cold. We're asking you to make a temporary sacrifice for your son. A few months. That's all. But instead of being helpful, you're making this all about yourself. My bedroom, Lillian. My house. My life. How is this not about me? Because family is supposed to matter more than personal comfort. That's what you always taught us. That we sacrifice for each other, that we put family first. But apparently, that only applied to you sacrificing for us, not the other way around. The accusation stung because there was a grain of truth in it. I had taught them that family came first. I had modeled sacrifice and selflessness. And now they were using my own values as weapons against me. I need to go, I said quietly. Mom, wait, I hung up. My hands were shaking. I felt like I couldn't breathe. This house suddenly felt suffocatingly small, despite having 3 bedrooms and nearly 1,600 square feet. I grabbed my purse and keys and headed for the door. Mrs. Kellerman? Owen appeared at the top of the stairs, looking concerned. Where are you going? Out, I said without stopping. But Mom, I closed the door behind me and walked to my car. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I needed to get away from that house, from those people, from the feeling that I was being slowly erased from my own life. I drove aimlessly for a while, then found myself pulling into the parking lot of Riverside Medical Center, where I'd worked for 35 years. I sat in the car, staring at the building, remembering the person I'd been when I worked there. Strong. Competent. Respected. Valued. When had I stopped being that person? My phone rang again. This time it was Clayton. Mom, Lillian just called me. She said you told her you want Owen to leave. What's going on? What's going on is that I made a mistake. I should never have agreed to this. Mom, you're upset. I get it. But you can't just kick Owen out. He has nowhere else to go. He has 2 siblings with homes and guest rooms. Patricia and I can't take them in. We have Sophie to think about, and she doesn't need to be exposed to complicated adult situations. But I do. I should be exposed to the complicated adult situation of my son living with his mistress in my bedroom. Clayton sighed, that patient, clinical sigh he used with difficult patients. Mom, you're not being rational right now. You're emotional and upset. Why don't you take a few days to calm down, and then we can have a reasonable conversation about, I am being rational, Clayton. I'm being more rational than I've been in months. I allowed myself to be bullied into giving up my home to accommodate Owen's bad decisions, and now I'm dealing with the consequences. Being mocked in my own house, being told I'm bitter and resentful, being treated like an inconvenient old woman who should be grateful for scraps of attention. No one's mocking you, I heard them. Why does no one believe me? I heard Vivian and Angelica talking about me last night. I heard every word. Okay, so they said some thoughtless things. People vent sometimes. It doesn't mean anything. It means everything, Clayton. It means they don't respect me. It means they see me as someone to use, not someone to value. And you and Lillian see me the same way. That's not true. We love you, you love me when I'm useful. When I'm accommodating and helpful and don't cause problems. But the minute I have needs or boundaries or opinions that conflict with what you want, I'm being unreasonable. Mom, I have to go. I hung up before he could respond. I sat in my car for another 20 minutes, watching nurses and doctors and visitors go in and out of the hospital. Lives being lived, problems being solved, people helping and being helped. Then I pulled out my phone and found Stephanie's number. It was 10:30 a.m. now. Late enough to call. She answered on the third ring. Hello? Stephanie? It's Dorothy. Dorothy Kellerman. Owen's mother. There was a long pause. Mrs. Kellerman. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I know. I'm sorry to call out of the blue. But I need to talk to you about Owen. About what happened between you two. If you're willing to talk to me. Another pause. Does Owen know you're calling me? No. And I'd prefer if it stayed that way. Why are you calling, Mrs. Kellerman? I took a deep breath. Because I think I'm finally seeing my son clearly for the first time in a long time. And I don't like what I'm seeing. And I think you might be able to help me understand how bad things really are. Stephanie's voice was quiet when she responded. Can you meet me for coffee? There's a lot you need to know. Things about Owen, about Angelica, about why I finally had to leave. But I don't want to do this over the phone. Yes. Where and when? There's a coffee shop called The Daily Grind on Maple Avenue in Fairhaven. Do you know it? I can find it. Can you meet me there in an hour? I'll be there. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt since this whole nightmare began. Hope. Maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe I wasn't the bitter, unreasonable old woman everyone was making me out to be. Maybe I was just someone who finally had enough information to see the truth. I started the car and headed toward Fairhaven, toward answers, toward whatever Stephanie was about to tell me. The phone call that would change everything was still ahead of me. But this conversation, this was the beginning of understanding what that phone call needed to be. The Daily Grind was a cozy coffee shop tucked between a bookstore and a yoga studio on Maple Avenue in Fairhaven. I'd never been there before. It was the kind of trendy place with exposed brick walls and reclaimed wood furniture that felt designed for younger people. But when I walked in at 11:30, I immediately spotted Stephanie sitting at a corner table, nervously turning a coffee cup between her hands. She looked different than I remembered. Thinner, tired, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. But when she saw me, she stood and gave me a tentative smile that held more genuine warmth than anything I'd received from my own family in days. Mrs. Kellerman. Thank you for coming. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I sat across from her, suddenly unsure how to begin. And please, call me Dorothy. I think we're past formalities at this point. A barista appeared, and I ordered a simple coffee. When she left, Stephanie and I sat in awkward silence for a moment, two women connected only by the man who had betrayed us both. I'm sorry, I said finally. For what Owen did to you. For not reaching out sooner. For not seeing what was happening. Stephanie's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. You didn't know. He's very good at hiding things, at presenting whatever version of himself people want to see. I lived with him for 12 years and I'm still not sure I ever knew the real Owen. Tell me what happened. Please. I need to understand. Stephanie took a deep breath. Where do I start? The affair? The money? The lies? Start wherever you need to. She nodded, gathering her thoughts. Owen and I met in college. He was charming, funny, always the life of the party. Everyone loved him. I was quieter, more serious. My friends couldn't understand what he saw in me, and honestly, sometimes I couldn't either. But he said I grounded him, made him want to be better. So we got married right after graduation. The barista brought my coffee. Stephanie waited until she left before continuing. For the first few years, things were good. Not perfect, but good. Owen was working his way up in construction management. I was teaching. We were building a life. But there were always these moments. Times when money would disappear from our account and Owen would have a vague explanation. Times when he'd stay out late and get defensive when I asked where he'd been. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I needed to trust him. When did things change? About 3 years ago. Owen started making really good money, his company promoted him to senior project manager, and suddenly we had this influx of cash. I was so relieved. We'd been struggling with debt, and I thought finally we could get ahead. But the debt never went away. It got worse. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through some documents. I started noticing charges on our credit cards. Expensive restaurants I'd never been to. Hotels. Jewelry stores. When I confronted him, he said they were work expenses, client entertainment, things that would eventually be reimbursed. But they never were. How much debt are we talking about? By the time I filed for divorce? Over $180,000. Credit cards, personal loans, a second mortgage on our condo that I didn't even know about until the bank contacted me about missed payments. I felt my stomach drop. $180,000? How is that even possible? Owen is very good at opening credit accounts. Very good at forging signatures. I found out he'd opened 3 credit cards in my name without my knowledge. Maxed them all out. Her voice was bitter now. I'm probably going to have to declare bankruptcy. My credit is destroyed. And I co-signed on everything because he was my husband and I trusted him. Did you know about Angelica? Not at first. I knew something was wrong, but I thought maybe he was gambling or had a drug problem. I never imagined another woman. She laughed, but it was a hollow sound. I found out in the stupidest way. He left his phone on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. It buzzed with a text from with a heart emoji. I opened it and there were months of messages. Explicit messages. Photos. Plans for trips and hotel stays. All paid for with our credit cards. I'm so sorry. The worst part wasn't even the affair. It was reading through those messages and realizing that he'd been telling her the same things he told me when we first got together. How she made him feel alive, how she understood him like no one else, how she was his soulmate. Word for word, Dorothy. The exact same script he'd used on me 12 years earlier. I thought about what Angelica had said that morning, about their deep, soul-level connection. The same lines Owen had probably used on Stephanie. The same lines he'd use on the next woman after Angelica. When I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. He just said he was in love with Angelica, that our marriage had been dead for years, that I was holding him back from being happy. He made it sound like I was the villain for being upset that he'd cheated on me and destroyed our finances. That sounds like Owen, I admitted quietly. Making himself the victim in situations where he's clearly wrong. Stephanie nodded. I told him he needed to choose. Me or her. He chose her without hesitation. Moved out the next day. That was 3 months ago. And now he's living in my house with Angelica and her mother. Her mother's there too. Stephanie looked surprised. Vivian? You know her? I met her once, about 6 months ago. Before I knew about the affair. Owen said he was doing some consulting work for a woman in San Diego whose husband had just died, helping her understand her finances and property holdings. He was going to fly out there for a few days. I thought it was legitimate work. My blood ran cold. What kind of consulting work? That's what I wondered later, after I found out about Angelica. Owen doesn't have any expertise in financial consulting or estate management. He's a construction project manager. But when I went through our credit card statements, I found charges from that trip, expensive dinners, a hotel room, flowers delivered to an address in San Diego. That's when I realized. The consulting work was just a cover story. He was there to see Angelica. But you said you met Vivian? Yes, she called our home phone by accident, looking for Owen. This was before I knew anything was wrong. We chatted for a few minutes. She went on and on about how wonderful Owen was, how he was helping her navigate Richard's estate, how lost she would be without his guidance. She mentioned her daughter Angelica, said she was so grateful that Owen had taken time out of his busy schedule to help them. The pieces were starting to come together, and the picture they formed made me feel sick. Stephanie, did Owen have access to Vivian's financial accounts? She frowned. I don't know. Why? Because I did some research this morning. Vivian's house in San Diego is in foreclosure. Her husband died without a will, and the estate is still in probate. She's broke, or close to it. Yet she and Angelica are living in my house rent-free, and from what I can tell, neither of them has a job. Stephanie's eyes widened. Oh my God. You think Owen was stealing from Vivian? I think it's possible. You said he's good at opening credit accounts, forging signatures. What if he convinced Vivian he was helping her with her finances while actually draining her accounts? What if that's where all the money went? That would explain why Angelica's mother is living with them now. If Owen drained her accounts and she lost her house, she'd have nowhere else to go. We sat in silence for a moment, both processing the implications. There's something else, Stephanie said quietly. Something I found out just before filing for divorce. Owen has a gambling problem. Online sports betting. I found statements from betting sites showing losses of over $50,000 in the past year alone. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, too close. Everything was making horrible sense now. Owen's financial desperation. His need for my free housing. The mysterious consulting work in San Diego that coincided with meeting Angelica. Vivian's financial ruin. He's a con artist, I said slowly. My son is a con artist. I think he's always been one, Stephanie said sadly. He just hit it well. And he targets vulnerable people, me, when I was young and naive and thought I'd never find someone like him. Vivian, when she was grieving and overwhelmed. And now you, his own mother. But I don't have any money. My pension barely covers my expenses. No, but you have something more valuable. A paid-off house. Free rent means he can save money without having to pay for housing. It gives him time to figure out his next move, his next target. I thought about Lillian and Clayton, how easily they'd been convinced that helping Owen was the right thing to do. Had he manipulated them too? Fed them a sob story about his marriage, painted himself as the victim, knowing they'd pressure me into taking him in? What are you going to do? Stephanie asked. I don't know yet. But I can't let this continue. I can't let him use me the way he used you and Vivian. Be careful, Dorothy. When I confronted Owen about everything, the affair, the debt, the gambling, he didn't get angry or defensive. He just got cold. Calculated. He threatened to fight me on everything in the divorce, to drag me through court for years, to destroy my credit even more than he already had. He said I'd end up with nothing and no one would believe my version of events because he's so charming, so likable. Did he follow through on the threats? He's trying. But I have a good lawyer, and I documented everything. The forged signatures, the credit cards opened in my name, all of it. His lawyer advised him to settle because the alternative is potential criminal charges for fraud. Criminal charges. The words hung in the air. Would you be willing to share that documentation with me? I asked. If I needed it? Stephanie pulled a USB drive from her purse. I brought this in case you asked. Copies of everything: bank statements, credit card records, text messages, emails. Everything that shows the pattern of financial abuse and fraud. I thought you might need it. I took the drive, feeling its small weight in my palm. This tiny piece of plastic held the power to destroy my son's life. Or save mine. Thank you, I said quietly. For meeting with me. For being honest. For this. Thank you for believing me. Owen told me no one would, that his family would always take his side over mine. It means more than you know that you're willing to see the truth. We talked for another hour, filling in more details, connecting more dots. By the time I left the coffee shop, I had a clear picture of who my son really was. And it broke my heart. But it also filled me with determination. I drove home slowly, my mind racing through options and scenarios. When I pulled into my driveway at 2 p.m., I saw Owen's truck was gone. Good. I needed time to think without him there. I walked into my house and found Angelica in the living room, on her laptop. She looked up when I entered, her expression cool. Owen went to look at some apartments. He said he'd be back later. I nodded and started toward my room, but her voice stopped me. Mrs. Kellerman, can we talk for a minute? I turned. About what? About this morning. I think we got off on the wrong foot. I don't want there to be tension between us. We're going to be living together for a while, and it would be better if we could get along. I studied her. She looked sincere, concerned even. But after everything Stephanie had told me, I could see through the performance now. Where's your mother? I asked. She went shopping. She needed to pick up some things. With what money? Angelica's expression flickered. Excuse me? Your mother's house in San Diego is in foreclosure. Your father died without a will. The estate is in probate. So I'm curious, where is she getting money for shopping? The concern on Angelica's face vanished, replaced by something harder. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Your mother is broke. You're living here because neither of you has anywhere else to go. And Owen is broke too, despite his good salary, because he has a gambling problem and a habit of draining other people's accounts. Angelica stood up slowly. You've been doing research on us? I've been trying to understand why my son suddenly needs his elderly mother's charity. And what I found is very interesting. Owen went to San Diego 8 months ago, supposedly to help your mother with financial consulting. Except Owen isn't a financial consultant. He's a construction manager. So what was he really doing there? He was helping my mother navigate my father's estate. He was courting you while emptying your mother's bank accounts. That's why she lost her house. That's why she's here now, living in my guest room. Because your boyfriend, my son, is a thief and a con artist, and he destroyed your mother's life the same way he destroyed his wife's. Angelica's face had gone pale. That's not true. Owen loves me. He would never. I just spent 2 hours with Stephanie. She told me everything. The debt, the forged signatures, the gambling, the pattern of lies. She gave me documentation of everything Owen did to her financially. Would you like to see it? Get out. Angelica's voice was shaking now. Get out of this room. This is Owen's home now, and you can't talk to me like this. This is my home, I said, my voice rising. My house that I paid for. And you're a guest here only because Owen manipulated my daughter into guilting me into allowing it. But that ends now. Owen warned me you'd try something like this. He said you're bitter and jealous and you try to poison me against him because you can't stand to see him happy. Is your mother happy? Now that she's lost everything? Is Stephanie happy, facing bankruptcy because Owen destroyed her credit? Before Angelica could respond, I heard the front door open. Vivian's voice called out, Angelica, darling, I found the most wonderful boutique. You should see what I bought. She appeared in the living room doorway, holding several shopping bags from expensive stores. She stopped when she saw us, sensing the tension. What's going on here? Your daughter's boyfriend is a con artist who stole from you, I said bluntly. That's why you lost your house. That's why you're here. Owen Kellerman took advantage of you while you were grieving, emptied your accounts, and left you with nothing. Vivian's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked like recognition. That's absurd, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it? When did you last actually look at your financial statements? When did you last verify your account balances? Vivian set down her shopping bags slowly. Owen has been helping me manage things. After Richard died, everything was so overwhelming. Owen offered to help organize the accounts, pay the bills, make sure everything was handled properly. And in the process, he had access to your accounts. Your passwords. Your financial information. He was helping me, Vivian insisted, but doubt crept into her voice. Then why is your house in foreclosure? Why is Richard's estate still in probate 9 months after his death? Why are you living in my guest room instead of your beautiful home in San Diego? Vivian sank onto the couch. There were complications with the estate. Owen explained it to me. Something about tax liens and outstanding debts. Did you verify any of that? Did you speak to a lawyer independently? Or did you just trust Owen? The silence that followed was answer enough. Oh God, Vivian whispered. Oh my God. Angelica knelt beside her mother. Mom, don't listen to her. She's trying to cause trouble because she's jealous. I need to see my accounts, Vivian said suddenly. Right now. I need to see exactly what's in my accounts. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and opened her banking app. I watched her face go from pale to ashen as she scrolled through the information. There's nothing left, she said faintly. The savings account Richard and I built for 40 years. It's empty. How did, Owen had your passwords, I said quietly. He had access. And he drained every account he could reach. But the shopping. Vivian looked at the bags she'd set down. I used my credit card. It went through. Credit card, not debit card? She nodded slowly. So you're going further into debt to buy things you can't afford, while Owen takes your money and gambles it away or uses it to fund his lifestyle. Vivian looked at Angelica, her expression a mixture of betrayal and dawning horror. You knew. You had to know. You've been with him for 8 months, living together, planning a future. You knew what he was doing to me. I didn't. Angelica's voice was desperate now. Mom, I swear I didn't know. Owen said he was helping you, that he was managing things so you didn't have to stress about it. And you never questioned why I lost the house? Why we had to move here to Connecticut to live with his mother? You never thought that was strange? I thought it was the probate issues Owen mentioned. I thought we were just in transition until things settled. Wake up. Vivian's voice cracked. There are no probate issues. There's just a con man who saw 2 vulnerable women and decided to take everything we had. The front door opened again. Owen's voice called out cheerfully, Hey, I'm back. You won't believe the apartments I looked at today. Total dumps. I think we're going to need to stay here longer than we thought. He stopped in the living room doorway, taking in the scene. Me standing with my arms crossed. Angelica on her knees beside her mother. Vivian on the couch, tears streaming down her face, her phone still in her hand. What's going on? He asked, his voice cautious now. Your mother's been telling us interesting stories, Vivian said, her voice cold. About gambling debts and forged signatures and stolen money. Owen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. The charm, the warmth, it all disappeared, replaced by something calculating and cold. Mom, what have you been saying? The truth. I had coffee with Stephanie today. His face hardened. Stephanie is a liar. She's bitter about the divorce and she's trying to poison everyone against me, She has documentation, Owen. Bank records, credit card statements, text messages. Everything you did to her. And I'm guessing if Vivian looks carefully at her financial records, she'll find the same pattern. I don't have to listen to this. Owen turned toward the stairs. Angelica, pack our things. We're leaving. Where will we go? Angelica's voice was small. Owen, we don't have any money. The apartments you looked at today, can we even afford them? I'll figure it out. I always do. With whose money? I asked. Mine? Because that's what this was really about, wasn't it? Moving in here rent-free so you could save money and recover from your gambling losses while you figured out your next con. Owen spun to face me. You have no idea what you're talking about. I'm your son. I came here because I needed help, and instead of supporting me, you've been working against me, poisoning my girlfriend and her mother. I showed them the truth. That's not poison, that's information they needed to protect themselves. From what? From me? I'm not the villain here, Mom. You are. You're the bitter old woman who can't stand to see her son happy, who has to destroy everything good in his life because yours is so empty and sad. The words were meant to hurt, and they did. But I'd heard them before, from Angelica, from the overheard conversation, from the way Lillian and Clayton had dismissed my concerns. My life might be sad, Owen. But it's honest. Can you say the same about yours? He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw my baby boy disappear completely, replaced by a stranger who was capable of things I'd never imagined. We're leaving, he said finally. All of us. We'll be out by tomorrow morning. Where will you go? Vivian asked, her voice hoarse. Owen, I have no money. You took it all. I can't even afford a hotel room. That's not my problem, Owen said coldly. You gave me access to your accounts. What I did with them is between you and your bank. The mask had finally come off completely. Angelica stood up slowly, looking at Owen like she was seeing him for the first time. Did you take my mother's money? I managed her accounts. There's a difference. Into your own pockets? Into gambling sites? Did you steal from my mother while she was grieving? Your mother is an adult who made her own choices about her finances. You're a liar. Angelica's voice was flat now, emotionless. Everything you told me was a lie. The soul connection, the future we were building, all of it. You were just using me to get close to my mother's money. That's not, get out. Angelica's voice was steel. Get out of this house. Now. I don't want to see you, don't want to hear your voice. Just get out. Owen looked around the room, seeming to calculate his options. Then he shrugged. Fine. Keep the stuff I can't carry. I don't need any of it. He walked upstairs. 10 minutes later, he came back down with 2 duffel bags. He didn't look at any of us as he walked out the door, got in his truck, and drove away. The silence he left behind was deafening. Vivian was crying quietly on the couch. Angelica stood frozen in the middle of the room. And I felt empty. My son was gone. Not the son I thought I had, but the real one. The con artist. The manipulator. The stranger who'd been wearing my child's face. I'm sorry, Vivian said finally, her voice thick with tears. Mrs. Kellerman, I'm so sorry. For everything we said about you, for how we treated you. You were right about everything. I know this doesn't fix anything, Angelica added quietly, but we'll leave tomorrow. We'll figure something out. You shouldn't have to deal with us anymore. I looked at these 2 women, one my age, one young enough to be my daughter, both destroyed by the same man. Both alone and broke and facing uncertain futures. I thought about Stephanie, rebuilding her life from the ruins Owen had left behind. I thought about myself, nearly manipulated into giving up everything for someone who saw me as nothing more than a resource to exploit. You can stay, I heard myself say. Not permanently. But for a few days, until you figure out what to do next." They both stared at me. "Why would you let us stay?" Vivian asked. "After everything we did, everything we said?" "Because Owen victimized all of us. And because I understand what it's like to have nowhere to go and no one to help you. When Bernard died and left me with 3 children to raise alone, I had no family support, no safety net. I survived because a few kind people helped me when I needed it most. Consider this me paying that kindness forward." That evening, after Vivian and Angelica had moved their belongings back into the guest room and my former bedroom respectively, I sat in my tiny room with my laptop and the USB drive Stephanie had given me. I spent 3 hours going through the documentation. The pattern was clear and devastating. Owen had systematically defrauded both women, using charm and manipulation to gain access to their finances, then draining accounts and running up debt in their names. But there was something else I found, buried in the credit card statements. Charges to properties in Vermont. A rental property listed in Owen's name that he'd never mentioned to Stephanie. Monthly payments from an LLC I didn't recognize. I did more digging, following the digital trail. Within 2 hours, I'd uncovered something that made my blood boil. Owen owned a rental property in Burlington, Vermont, a 3-bedroom house he'd bought 2 years ago using money he'd stolen from Stephanie. He'd been collecting rent from tenants while telling Stephanie they were too broke to afford a house. The rental income was going into a separate account he'd never disclosed. He wasn't broke. He wasn't desperate. He'd moved into my house not because he had no other options, but because he wanted to maximize his profits while minimizing his expenses. And I knew exactly what I needed to do. I picked up my phone and made a call. "Lillian? It's Mom. I need you to come over tomorrow morning. You and Clayton both. There's something you need to see." The next morning, my children arrived at 9 a.m., both looking confused and concerned. Vivian and Angelica waited in the guest room, giving us privacy. I spread out the documentation on my dining room table. Bank statements, credit card records, property deeds, LLC registration documents. Everything. "What is all this?" Clayton asked. "This is who your brother really is," I said quietly. I walked them through it all. The fraud against Stephanie. The theft from Vivian. The secret property in Vermont. The gambling debts. The systematic lies and manipulation. Lillian's face went pale as she read through the documents. Clayton kept shaking his head, saying, "No, this can't be right," but the evidence was irrefutable. "He lied to all of us," I said. "He made you think he was desperate and broke so you'd pressure me into taking him in. But he owns a rental property worth over $300,000. He has income from tenants. He chose to live here rent-free while running up debt in other people's names, gambling away their money. Where is he now?" Lillian asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Gone. He left yesterday when Angelica and Vivian confronted him about the theft." "Mom, I'm so sorry." Clayton's voice cracked. "We should have listened to you. We should have questioned his story instead of just assuming I was being a bitter, difficult old woman." I kept my voice gentle, but I needed them to hear it. "That's what you both said. That I was unreasonable, selfish, making everything about myself instead of helping family." Lillian started crying. "I was so horrible to you. I bulldozed you into giving up your bedroom, guilt you about not being supportive, dismissed every concern you raised. And I was wrong about everything." "Yes, you were," I agreed. "Both of you were. You saw me as an obstacle to solving Owen's problem instead of a person whose home and dignity deserved respect." "What do we do now?" Clayton asked. "Do we call the police? Report him for fraud?" "That's up to Stephanie and Vivian. They're his victims. But there's something else I need to tell you." I pulled out my phone and made one more call, putting it on speaker so everyone could hear. It rang 3 times before a man's voice answered. "Burlington Police Department, Detective Morrison." "Detective Morrison, my name is Dorothy Kellerman. I'm calling to report fraud, theft, and identity theft committed by my son, Owen Kellerman. I have extensive documentation and I'd like to file a formal complaint." Lillian gasped. Clayton reached across the table and gripped my hand. "I'm prepared to testify against him if necessary," I continued. "And I have 2 other victims who are willing to do the same. My son has stolen over $200,000 from vulnerable people, and he needs to be held accountable." As I gave Detective Morrison the details, laid out the evidence, explained the pattern of fraud, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. Not power over anyone else. Just power over my own life, my own choices, my own boundaries. Owen had thought I was a weak, desperate old woman who would do anything to maintain family connections. He'd calculated that I was too afraid of being alone, too guilt-ridden about being a bad mother, to ever stand up to him or hold him accountable. He'd miscalculated badly. The investigation took 3 months. During that time, Vivian and Angelica stayed in my house, but as genuine guests this time, contributing to expenses, helping around the house, treating me with real respect instead of performative courtesy. Vivian filed her own police report in California. Stephanie provided her documentation. The evidence was overwhelming. Owen was arrested in early June, charged with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and financial elder abuse. He tried to reach out to me from jail, leaving voicemail messages that swung between apologizing and blaming, between begging for help and accusing me of betraying him. I didn't respond to any of them. At his arraignment, he pleaded not guilty, but his lawyer advised him that with the evidence against him, he'd likely face significant prison time if convicted. Eventually, he took a plea deal, 5 years in prison, with restitution to be paid to his victims. 5 years. My son would spend 5 years in prison because of choices he'd made, people he'd hurt, lines he'd crossed. And I had been the one to make the call that set that in motion. Lillian and Clayton struggled with it. They understood intellectually that I'd done the right thing, but emotionally, they wrestled with the idea that I'd reported their brother to the police. "He's still our brother," Clayton said one evening, months after the plea deal. "Part of me feels like we should have tried to help him instead of, help him do what?" I interrupted. "Continue stealing from people? Continue destroying lives? At what point does helping family become enabling abuse?" They didn't have an answer for that. Vivian eventually returned to California, determined to rebuild her life from scratch. She sold what assets she could recover, found a small apartment, got a job as a receptionist at a dental office. She called me every few weeks to update me on her progress, to thank me again for exposing the truth even though it meant destroying my own son's freedom. Angelica stayed in Connecticut, found work as a fitness instructor, started therapy to process the manipulation and betrayal. She moved out of my house after 4 months, but we stayed in touch. In a strange way, she became the daughter I wished Lillian could be, honest about her mistakes, grateful for help, treating me like a person whose opinions and feelings mattered. Stephanie's divorce was finalized. With Owen's restitution payments, she was able to pay off most of the fraudulent debt. Her credit would take years to recover, but at least she had a path forward. As for me, I got my bedroom back. I got my house back. I got my life back. But more than that, I got something I'd lost years ago without even realizing it, my voice. I was no longer the accommodating mother who sacrificed everything without complaint. I was Dorothy Kellerman, who had survived widowhood and raised 3 children alone and built a life through hard work and determination. I was someone who could set boundaries, demand respect, and stand up for herself even when it cost her relationships she'd once thought were essential. 6 months after Owen's arrest, I was sitting on my front porch on a warm September evening, drinking iced tea and reading a book, when a car pulled up. Stephanie got out, smiling. "Dorothy. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Never. Come sit." She joined me on the porch, and we sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "I've been thinking about something," Stephanie said eventually. "About that day at the coffee shop when you called me. You said you were finally seeing Owen clearly for the first time. But I think you were wrong." I looked at her curiously. "I think you saw yourself clearly for the first time," she continued. You saw that you deserved better than what your family was giving you. That's what really changed everything, not just exposing Owen, but recognizing your own worth. I felt tears prick my eyes. Maybe you're right. I know I'm right. She squeezed my hand. Because you taught me to do the same thing. You showed me that it's not selfish to protect yourself, even from family. That love without respect isn't really love at all. We sat together as the sun set, two women who'd survived the same predator, who'd rebuilt their lives from the wreckage he'd left behind. I was 70 years old. I'd lost a son, not to death, but to his own choices. My relationships with my daughter and other son were complicated now, marked by their guilt and my hurt. But I had something more valuable than uncomplicated family relationships. I had myself back. And for the first time in decades, that felt like enough. 3 years later, I'm 73 years old and living my best life. I volunteer at the library 4 days a week. I joined a hiking group for seniors. I even went on a few dates with Harold from church, nothing serious, but pleasant company and good conversation. Owen was released early for good behavior after serving 3 years. He sent me a letter asking if we could talk, if I could forgive him, if there was any chance at rebuilding our relationship. I wrote back a single sentence: I forgive you, but I don't trust you, and I won't have you in my life. It was the hardest letter I've ever written. But it was also the truest. Lillian and I have slowly rebuilt our relationship. She apologized, really apologized, not the performative kind where someone says sorry but explains why they were actually right. She acknowledged how she'd steamrolled me, dismissed my feelings, treated me like an inconvenient obstacle rather than her mother. We have dinner once a month now. It's not what it was before, but it's something real. Clayton struggled more with guilt. He became overprotective, calling too often, offering help I didn't need, trying to make up for not believing me when it mattered. It took a year of gentle conversations before he understood that what I needed wasn't his guilt or his compensation, just his respect. The house feels like mine again. My bedroom, my kitchen, my space. I painted the walls in the small room that had been my prison cell, turned it into a proper craft room with good lighting and organized storage. Sometimes I sit in there and remember those dark days when I felt so powerless, so diminished. And I remind myself that I found my way back. Last month, I got a message on Facebook from a woman I didn't know. Her name was Jennifer Hart, and she said she was dating someone who had recently been released from prison. His name was Owen Kellerman. He told me about his difficult relationship with his mother, she wrote. About how she turned against him when he made some mistakes. But I wanted to reach out to you because something feels off. He's asked to help me manage my finances because I'm going through a difficult divorce, and I just wanted to check, is he trustworthy? I stared at that message for a long time. Owen was already finding his next victim. Already spinning his story, painting himself as the misunderstood son betrayed by his bitter mother. Already positioning himself to drain another woman's accounts. I could have ignored the message. It wasn't my responsibility to save every woman Owen set his sights on. But I thought about the Dorothy who had sat in that coffee shop 3 years ago, listening to Stephanie's story, seeing the truth for the first time. I thought about how different my life might have been if no one had ever warned me, if I'd discovered the truth too late to protect myself. I wrote back. I told Jennifer everything. I sent her the documentation, the police reports, the news articles about Owen's conviction. I told her about Stephanie, about Vivian, about the pattern of fraud and manipulation that defined my son's relationships with women. She thanked me. Blocked Owen immediately. Filed a protective order when he tried to contact her anyway. And I realized something important. The phone call that changed everything wasn't just the one I made to the police 3 years ago. It was every call I made after that. Every time I chose truth over comfort, boundaries over guilt, self-respect over family obligation. Every time I said no when I wanted to say yes, just to keep the peace. Every time I demanded to be treated with dignity instead of accepting whatever scraps of affection came my way. Those calls, hundreds of small, daily acts of self-advocacy, those were what really transformed my life. I'm 73 years old. I live alone in my paid-off house in Willowbrook, Connecticut. My son is a convicted felon who I haven't spoken to in 3 years. My relationships with my other children are complicated and imperfect. And I've never been happier. Because I finally learned the most important lesson of my life: you teach people how to treat you. And for too many years, I taught my family that I would accept anything, forgive anything, sacrifice anything for the sake of keeping them close. I taught them that my needs didn't matter, that my feelings were secondary, that my home and my dignity were negotiable. It took being displaced from my own bedroom, mocked in my own house, and treated like a convenient old woman by strangers to finally understand that I deserved better. And once I understood that, once I really believed it deep in my bones, everything changed. Not because my family suddenly started treating me better. Not because Owen magically became the son I'd wanted him to be. Not because my life became easier or simpler or less lonely. But because I became someone who knew her own worth and refused to accept anything less than respect. That's the call I'm most proud of making. The call to myself. The one that said, "Dorothy Kellerman, you are valuable. You are worthy. You deserve to be treated with dignity and kindness. And you don't have to settle for less just because someone shares your DNA." That call, the one that changed how I saw myself, that's the one that really changed everything. If you've watched this story all the way to the end, thank you. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Maybe you're someone who's been taken advantage of by family. Maybe you're someone who's struggling to set boundaries with people you love. Maybe you're someone who's sacrificed so much that you've forgotten what it feels like to prioritize yourself. If that's you, I want you to know something: it's never too late to reclaim your life. It's never too late to demand respect. It's never too late to say, enough, and mean it. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. You don't have to accept cruelty in the name of family loyalty. You don't have to be convenient and accommodating and self-sacrificing to be worthy of love. The right people, the people who truly care about you, will respect your boundaries. They'll value your feelings. They'll treat you with the dignity you deserve. And the people who don't? They're showing you who they are. Believe them. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where family took advantage of you? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping the peace and protecting yourself? What would you have done in my situation? Comment below and let me know. And please, tell me what country you're watching from. I'd love to know how far Dorothy's story has reached. If this story touched you, helped you, or made you think differently about family obligations and self-respect, please like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, you are never too old, never too late, and never too alone to stand up for yourself. The most important call you'll ever make is the one where you decide you're worth fighting for.